Welcome to Cotswold Cozy Mysteries. I'm Clara Whitfield, and tonight we return to Carsely, where Parish notices travel faster than sense, and a cup of tea may carry more judgment than comfort. In Carsely, a hymn sheet can travel farther than a confession, especially when the wrong word is printed in exactly the right place. The church restoration appeal is meant to bring the village together. Naturally, it begins by annoying nearly everyone. So settle in and ask yourself, have you ever seen one tiny mistake reveal more truth than a grand accusation? Chapter 1. A very proper humiliation. Agatha Raisin had dressed for gratitude. The scarlet jacket was new, expensive, and meant to suggest not only generosity but importance. Unfortunately, Carsely Parish Hall was not built for importance. It was built for stackable chairs, damp coats, weak coffee, and arguments about urns. Agatha arrived at the church restoration appeal meeting just late enough to be noticed. "Agatha," said Mrs. Bloxby warmly. "How lovely. We were just beginning." "So I see," said Agatha. At the head of the table sat Celia Vane, the new committee chair. Celia was thin, neat, silver-haired, and dressed in navy, with the expression of a woman who believed Christian charity worked best when properly supervised. "Mrs. Raisin," said Celia, "how good of you to join us." Agatha sat down and smiled with effort. Around the table were Reverend Bloxby, looking patient, Iris Pomfrey, the choir organizer, clutching her music folder, Nancy Pargeter from the village shop, with a cardboard box of printed papers at her feet, and Beryl Gudgeon, who hovered near the tea-table as if cups might suffer without her. Celia tapped her agenda. The Hymn and Tea fundraiser must present Carsely as dignified, restrained, and united. "Ambitious," murmured Reverend Bloxby. A few people smiled. Celia did not. "I have revised the list of responsibilities," she said, and passed round typed sheets. Agatha read hers. Reverend Bloxby. Welcome and blessing. Mrs. Bloxby. Guest reception. Iris Pomfrey. Choir coordination. Nancy Pargeter. Printed materials. Agatha Raisin. Refreshments assistant. Assistant? Said Agatha. Celia folded her hands. Yes, I was sponsor liaison. That was the preliminary arrangement. But we must think of tone. Tone? A parish event requires simplicity. Some of your ideas were perhaps a little London. The insult was delivered so politely that several people pretended not to hear it. Agatha felt heat rise under her collar. She had spent too many years becoming the sort of woman who could afford good clothes, good shoes, and good wine to be dismissed as flashy by a committee tyrant in sensible pearls. "I see," she said. "And refreshments are less London?" "Refreshments are essential," said Celia. "Everyone notices them. Only when they're bad. Then we shall trust you to prevent that." Mrs. Bloxby gave Agatha a small, sympathetic glance. Agatha lifted her chin and decided, privately, that Celia Vane deserved stale biscuits for the rest of her natural life. The meeting moved on to hymns. "We open with praise, 'My soul, the King of Heaven,'" said Celia. Then the vicar's remarks, the children's reading, the appeal address, and 2 choir pieces. "3," said Iris Pomfrey softly. Celia looked up. "I beg your pardon? We agreed 3, including my solo." "I thought we had decided the solo was unnecessary." "We had not," said Iris, smiling too quickly. "It is a fundraiser, Iris, not a concert." Iris's smile stayed in place, but her hands tightened around the folder. Nancy Pargeter bent down and lifted the cardboard box. "I've brought sample hymn sheets," she said brightly. "Only the first run, mind. I'll do the final batch once everything's approved." She passed them round. Agatha examined hers. Cream paper. Modest type. Quite respectable. Then Reverend Bloxby made a small, choking sound. Mrs. Bloxby leaned over his shoulder. Iris covered her mouth. "What?" asked Celia sharply. Nancy looked at her own sheet and went pink. The closing hymn should have asked the congregation to lift their hearts in humble praise. Instead, it invited them to lift their hats in humble praise. For a moment, the room held itself still. Then someone laughed. The laughter spread at once, relieved and wicked. Even Agatha laughed. It was the first enjoyable moment of the evening. Nancy gave a helpless little shrug. "Oh, dear. I'm sorry. One letter slipped through. I'll correct it, of course." Celia's face hardened. "This is not a carnival poster, Mrs. Pargeter. It's only the sample batch." "It is a parish document," Reverend Bloxby said mildly. "I dare say the Almighty has endured worse printing." But Celia had found her target. Sloppiness dressed as charm is still sloppiness. The laughter died. Nancy began gathering the sheets back. "I'll destroy these and print the corrected ones." Celia kept hers, Nancy noticed. "I can take that one too." "No," said Celia. "I shall keep it as a reminder." "Of what?" asked Agatha. Celia slipped the misprinted hymn sheet into her folder. "Of standards." The word arranged the room into those who had them and those who were being watched. After that, the meeting dragged through cake quantities, raffle tickets, choir robes, press notices, and the grave question of whether gold-edged napkins were tasteful or assertive. Celia decided they were assertive. Agatha decided Celia was unbearable. When the meeting finally ended, people rose with the weary relief of prisoners released for good behaviour. Mrs. Bloxby came to Agatha's side. "You were quite restrained." "No, I wasn't. More than you wish to be. I wished to hit her with the agenda. That would have been less helpful." Outside, early evening lay soft over Carsely. The honey-coloured cottages glowed faintly under a damp sky, and the church tower rose beyond the trees. Agatha lit a cigarette and looked back through the parish hall window. Celia was collecting papers. Nancy was packing away the hymn sheets with a stiff, unhappy face. Iris stood alone near the piano. Beryl Gudgeon folded a tea-cloth once, twice, then again into a small, precise wedge before tucking it beside the cups. Agatha blew smoke into the cool air. "Refreshments, assistant," she said. The words still tasted sour. She got into her car and drove home, already planning cakes Celia Vane would be forced to admire. Behind her, in Celia's folder, one misprinted hymn sheet remained. Hats in humble praise. A silly mistake. A village joke. A spoiled bit of paper. For now, that was all. Chapter 2. Tea, Trumpets, and Trouble. By the following afternoon, Agatha had decided that Celia Vane would be defeated by sponge cake. It was not, strictly speaking, a Christian response. But then, Agatha had never pretended to be a saint, and Celia's version of Christian conduct appeared to consist mostly of finding fault with other people's napkins. The vicarage lawn had been marked out for the hymn and tea fundraiser, with folding tables, borrowed chairs, and lengths of bunting that sagged in the damp Cotswold air. Beyond the clipped hedge, the churchyard lay green and quiet, its old stones leaning at various angles, while the church tower rose above them with the patient look of a building that had survived worse committees. Agatha arrived carrying a notebook, 3 sample menus, and a determination to be indispensable. "No, no," she said to Beryl Gudgeon, who was setting out plain white cups on a trestle table. "Not like that. We need height. People trust food arranged at different levels." Beryl blinked. "Do they?" "Of course they do. It suggests abundance. I thought abundance was when there was enough." "That too," said Agatha, impatiently. She began rearranging plates, moving cups, and explaining the difference between village tea and proper presentation. Beryl listened with her usual anxious helpfulness, nodding as if Agatha were revealing a difficult doctrine. Mrs. Bloxby came out of the vicarage carrying a small tray of spoons. "Agatha, how energetic you are! I am merely trying to prevent Carsely from looking like a bring-and-buy sale with hymns. I believe some people rather like bring-and-buy sales. Those people should not be in charge of public image." A voice behind her said, "How fortunate, then, that you are in charge of biscuits." Agatha turned. Sir Charles Frayth stood by the gate, wearing country clothes that appeared old, careless, and more expensive than anything new. He smiled at her in that infuriating way which suggested he had arrived just in time to enjoy her worst mood. "Charles," said Agatha, "have you come to help or gloat? I always hope to combine the two. You can carry that urn." He looked at the large tea-urn by the parish hall door. "Can I?" "Yes." "Then I shall, but only because watching you try would damage village morale." Agatha glared, but he lifted the urn without fuss and carried it to the table. For all his laziness, Charles had a way of becoming useful at inconvenient moments, which made it harder to dislike him properly. Celia Vane appeared from the church path with a clipboard. She inspected the lawn as if the grass had applied for a position and failed. "Mrs. Raisin," she said, "why are there cake stands?" "They are for cakes." "I gathered that." "Then you're ahead of most committees." Celia ignored this. "I asked for simplicity, and I am giving you elegant simplicity. These labels are unnecessary. People like to know what they're eating. They can ask. Not if they're shy. Anyone too shy to ask about fruitcake should probably not attend a fundraiser." Charles made a soft sound that might have been a cough. Agatha kicked him lightly on the ankle. Celia moved on to the napkins. "Cream with gold edging." "Understated," said Agatha. "Vulgar," said Celia. "Only to people determined to suffer." Mrs. Bloxby intervened gently. "Perhaps the napkins could be discussed indoors." "I have no objection to discussing them anywhere," said Celia, "provided we arrive at plain white." Agatha opened her mouth, but before she could reply, a man in a camel coat came briskly down the churchyard path. He was handsome in a polished, professional way, with smooth hair and a leather folder tucked under one arm. "Rupert Cottle," murmured Mrs. Bloxby. "The restoration consultant." Rupert greeted everyone with a smile that had probably been practised in front of glass. "Dreadfully sorry. Stonework crisis in Misester. These medieval buildings do insist on behaving medievally." Celia turned on him at once. "Mr. Cottle, I have been looking at your revised figures. Excellent. Clear as a bell, I hope?" "Not at all. The south wall repairs have doubled." "Ah! Heritage work is rather like illness, Mrs. Vane. One investigates a cough and discovers a lung." Agatha disliked him immediately, though not as much as Celia, which left room for development. Celia lowered her voice, but not enough. "I shall want a second opinion before the appeal pays another invoice." Rupert's smile stayed in place. His eyes did not. "Naturally," he said, "though delay can be expensive." "So can trust," said Celia. He gave a small bow and went into the church. A few minutes later, Patrick Mallow arrived carrying a framed print and an air of reverence. Patrick dealt in antiques from a shop near Mercester, and spoke of woodworm as if it were a moral failing. "Mrs. Vane," he said, "I've brought the sample piece for the vestry wall." Celia glanced at it. "Reproduction? Sympathetic reproduction. Still reproduction." Patrick's smile flickered. "And while you are here," Celia added, "we should discuss the memorial plaque you valued." "I gave a fair estimate." You gave a convenient estimate. His hand moved to the frame, touching the edge lightly. Church pieces are delicate things, he said. So are reputations, said Celia. Agatha watched with interest. Celia was not content to annoy. She collected discomfort, as if saving it for later use. Beryl came past with a stack of cloths. Mrs. Vane, shall I lay the cups inside if it rains? Celia turned. Not yet. And Beryl about the donation records. I noticed a correction. Beryl stopped. The cloths shifted in her arms. A correction? In the ledger. I shall speak to you later. Yes, Mrs. Vane. Beryl's voice was quiet. She moved away quickly and began folding the cloths on a side table, each fold sharp and exact. Agatha looked from Beryl to Celia. Mrs. Bloxby had seen it too. She does rather leave bruises, Agatha said. Celia? No. The Virgin Mary. Of course, Celia. Mrs. Bloxby looked towards the church, where Celia was now instructing Iris Pomfrey about choir positions. I sometimes think, Mrs. Bloxby said, that Mrs. Vane is less interested in restoring the church than in controlling everyone who enters it. Agatha was surprised. Mrs. Bloxby rarely sharpened a remark unless it had first passed through kindness and come out still necessary. Across the lawn, Iris Pomfrey's thin voice rose. The choir has always stood there. And now, said Celia, it will stand here. But the acoustics will survive. Iris smiled that same quick, wounded smile Agatha had seen at the meeting. Charles came back to Agatha's side. You're staring, he said. I'm observing. Ah, much more dangerous. Agatha watched Celia cross the vicarage lawn, clipboard pressed to her chest, leaving irritation behind her like perfume. Someone ought to take that woman down a peg, said Agatha. Charles looked amused. Do be careful. In Carsely, a peg is often attached to a gallows of gossip. Don't be ridiculous. I try not to. It makes me unpopular. A light rain began, soft enough to pretend it was not happening. Beryl hurried to cover the cups. Iris gathered her music. Rupert reappeared at the church door, smiling too hard. Patrick slipped away towards the lane, still touching the frame under his arm. Celia stood in the middle of the lawn and raised her voice. Everyone, please remember, tomorrow's rehearsal must run smoothly. No delays, no improvisations, and no further mistakes. Her eyes rested briefly on Agatha, then on Nancy Pargeter, who had just arrived with a wrapped paper bundle under one arm. Nancy's face stiffened. Agatha felt again the sting of her own demotion. But now it mingled with something more useful. Celia Vane had enemies. Not dramatic enemies, perhaps. Carsely did not go in much for cloaks and daggers. Its weapons were unpaid bills, wounded pride, exposed secrets, and smiles that lasted 1 second too long. Agatha looked at the bunting, the churchyard path, the tea-tables, the damp grass, and the neat little world Celia was determined to command. Then she reached for her notebook. If she was to be Refreshments assistant, she might as well make herself dangerously well informed. Chapter 3. The Accident After Evensong. The rehearsal began badly, which Agatha considered proof that God had a sense of humour. By 6 o'clock the following evening, Carsely Church was filled with damp coats, restless choir members, and the smell of old stone after rain. The lamps glowed softly against the pillars. Buckets stood discreetly beneath 2 leaks near the north aisle, though Celia Vane had insisted they be hidden behind hymn-boards. You cannot hide a leak with optimism, Agatha told Mrs. Bloxby. No, said Mrs. Bloxby, but one may soften its appearance. Agatha had come officially to check final refreshment arrangements. Unofficially, she had come to see whether Celia would insult anyone interesting. She was not disappointed. Celia stood near the front pew with her folder, issuing instructions like a general with a parish accent. The choir enters after the children are seated. Iris, not too slowly. Reverend Bloxby, perhaps your remarks could be concise. I shall try to keep God brief, said the vicar. Celia ignored him. Nancy Pargeter came in carrying a fresh paper bundle wrapped in brown string. Her face was pale, but determined. "The corrected hymn sheets," she said. "I checked them twice." Celia took the bundle. "Thank you. Put them on the vestry table." Nancy's mouth tightened. "I thought you wanted to approve them first." "I do. On the vestry table." Agatha, standing near a pillar, watched Nancy obey. The shopkeeper disappeared through the little side passage towards the vestry, shoulders stiff beneath her cardigan. Iris Pomfrey gathered the choir with nervous little claps. "Now, everyone, from the second verse, please. And remember, we are singing, not apologizing." The choir began. They were not bad. They were not good either. But they possessed the stubborn confidence of village singers who had survived weddings, funerals, and Christmas descants. Halfway through the hymn, the lights flickered. A murmur ran through the church. "Old wiring," said Rupert Cottle from the back, in a voice that suggested the wiring had personally confirmed his invoice. Celia turned. "Mr. Cottle, perhaps later." Patrick Mallow, seated near the aisle, smiled down at his polished shoes. Beryl Gudgeon hurried past with a stack of spare cloths, though why the rehearsal required cloths nobody knew. The lights steadied. Then the rain came harder. It struck the roof first as a whisper, then as a rattle. The choir faltered. One of the choir boys sneezed. Iris lifted both hands and pushed them onward by sheer will. Agatha found herself oddly moved. The church, shabby and leaking and bossed about by Celia Vane, still had a quiet dignity. It made human fuss seem smaller, though not small enough to stop it. At the end of the hymn, Celia checked her watch. "We are wasting time. We shall run the closing movement once more, then the procession." Nancy returned from the vestry passage. "Mrs. Vane," she said, low but audible, "the bundle is on the table." "Good. And I'd like the sample misprints back, if you still have any. I don't want them confused with the corrected sheets." Celia looked at her for a beat too long. "There will be no confusion if people do as instructed." Nancy flushed. "I only meant—" "I know what you meant." Agatha moved closer, but Mrs. Bloxby touched her arm. "Not now," she murmured. That was the trouble with Mrs. Bloxby. She was nearly always right at exactly the moment Agatha least wished her to be. The rehearsal lurched on. The children missed their cue. Reverend Bloxby misplaced his notes and found them under the Bible. Rupert Cottle slipped out towards the vestry passage, then reappeared when Mrs. Bloxby asked whether he had lost something. "Only patience," he said smoothly. Celia's eyes narrowed. At 6:45, the lights flickered again and went out. The church fell into a grey half-dark, lit only by the fading evening through the stained-glass windows. Someone laughed nervously. "Remain where you are," Celia called. "There is no need for drama." Agatha, who felt there was often a need for drama, said nothing. The emergency lights clicked on weakly near the porch. People shifted in the pews. The choir muttered. Rain beat hard against the south windows. "I'll check the fuse box," said Reverend Bloxby. "It's in the passage," said Mrs. Bloxby. "Alf, take care." Celia moved briskly down the aisle. "I shall fetch the corrected sheets while we are delayed. We may as well use the time." "She'd organised the flood," muttered Agatha. Charles Fraith had appeared beside her without warning, smelling faintly of rain and expensive wool. "Only if she could chair it," he said. "What are you doing here?" "Supporting heritage, and avoiding a dinner in Mercester." "Same thing, in your case," He smiled. The vicar returned with a torch. "It may take a few minutes." Celia was no longer in the nave. No one noticed at once. That, later, would seem strange, and not strange at all. Celia had spent so much time moving people about that her own movement had become part of the furniture. The lights came back with a tired buzz. Iris gave a little cry. "Where is Mrs. Vane?" "She went to the vestry," said Nancy quickly. "No," said Beryl from near the font. "I saw her go towards the side door." "You were by the cups," said Iris. "I was fetching cloths." "You are always fetching cloths," said Agatha. Mrs. Bloxby looked towards the vestry passage. "Alf?" The vicar went first. Agatha followed, because nobody had told her not to quickly enough. Charles followed because he enjoyed seeing what would happen when she was told. The vestry passage was narrow and cold. A small table stood inside the vestry door. It was empty. "The hymn sheets," said Agatha. "Where are they?" Nancy, who had followed them, stared. "I put them there. I swear I did." A sound came from outside. Not a scream. Something smaller. A shocked call from one of the choir boys who had gone towards the side entrance. They found Celia Vane at the foot of the old vestry steps outside, where the stone was worn smooth by generations of Parish shoes. The scene was mercifully still. Her navy figure lay awkwardly near the low wall, one hand close to her folder. Rain dotted the path and darkened the stone. The folder had fallen open, papers fluttering weakly in the wet air. Mrs. Bloxby reached the steps and stopped. Reverend Bloxby's face changed. All the mild humour left it. "Everyone back inside," he said quietly. "Now." Agatha did not move. Charles touched her elbow. "Agatha, I'm not in the way." "You are always in the way. Come on." She let him draw her back only as far as the passage door. Within half an hour, Bill Wong arrived from Mircester, calm, damp, and serious. He greeted Agatha with the resigned expression of a policeman who had found her already at the edge of trouble. "Mrs. Raisin." "Bill, please tell me you didn't touch anything." "Of course I didn't." He looked at her. "I didn't touch anything important." "Agatha?" "I didn't touch anything." He went to speak with Reverend Bloxby, then examined the steps, the path, the open folder, and the side door. The village gathered in murmuring clusters inside the church, frightened into politeness. Nancy sat in a pew with both hands locked together. Iris dabbed at her eyes. Beryl moved from person to person offering tissues, though her own face was the colour of old paper. Agatha watched Bill crouch near the steps. A uniformed officer held a torch. There was mud near the side door. One damp footprint pointed towards the churchyard path. But the step on which Celia must have slipped looked oddly clean. Agatha frowned. In Carsely, mud was democratic. It clung to everyone. It did not politely remove itself from the most important stone. Bill came back inside at last. "At this stage," he said, "we're treating Mrs. Vane's death as unexplained." "Not an accident?" asked Agatha. "I didn't say that." "You didn't say it was one either." "No." Nancy began to cry quietly. From the vestry, Reverend Bloxby returned, holding nothing at all. "The corrected hymn sheets are gone," he said. The words passed through the church like a draught. Agatha looked towards the empty passage, the side door, and the wet churchyard beyond. The fundraiser had lost its chairwoman, the village had lost its certainty, and somewhere between the vestry table and the rain, a bundle of corrected hymn sheets had vanished. For the first time since Celia Vane had demoted her to Refreshments assistant, Agatha forgot to be offended. Chapter 4. The Queue at the Village Shop. By morning, Carsely had reached that dangerous stage of grief in which nobody knew anything but everyone had begun to remember things. The village shop was the natural court of first appeal. Nancy Pargeter's shop sold bread, stamps, milk, local eggs, birthday cards, emergency string, and exactly the sort of gossip people claimed not to enjoy. It stood on the corner by the green, its windows crowded with notices for dog-sitting, jam-making, lost spectacles, and a lecture in Mercester on damp in historic buildings. Agatha arrived shortly after 10, intending to ask quiet, intelligent questions. This intention lasted until she opened the door. The shop was full. Mrs. Mason was buying tea bags she did not need. Old Mr. Boggle was examining tins of peaches with the care of a magistrate. 2 choir members stood by the newspapers, not reading them. Iris Pomfrey hovered near the biscuits. Everyone had the bright-eyed stillness of people waiting for someone else to say the first improper thing. Nancy stood behind the counter, pale but brisk, ringing up purchases with unnecessary speed. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin," she said. "Morning, Nancy." The room listened. Agatha picked up a basket, because one could not interrogate a shopkeeper without at least pretending to buy something. She put in coffee, cat food, and a packet of chocolate biscuits, then decided the biscuits looked like an admission of weakness and added washing-up liquid. "Terrible business," said Mrs. Mason at last. There was a soft collective release of breath. The first improper thing had been said. "Very sad," said Iris Pomfrey, pressing a handkerchief to her nose. "Shocking," said Mr. Boggle. "A woman falling like that." "If she fell," said one of the choir members. Nancy's hand paused over the till. Agatha looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" The choir member flushed. "Nothing. Only Bill Wong was here earlier asking questions." "He would," said Agatha. "It's his job." "And about the hymn sheets," said Mrs. Mason. "I heard the corrected ones disappeared." Nancy shut the till drawer rather hard. "They were on the vestry table," she said. "I put them there." "Nobody said you didn't," said Iris quickly, in the tone of someone who was very much thinking it. Agatha saw Nancy's face tighten. She had come to question her, not defend her. Still, there was something ugly about the way the shop had shifted its weight towards blame. "People lose papers at church events all the time," Agatha said. "Half of Carsely can't keep hold of a raffle ticket." "That's true," said Mr. Boggle. "Lost mine twice at the harvest supper." "You won a marrow," said Mrs. Mason. "I did not want a marrow." Nancy gave Agatha a flicker of gratitude. Agatha approached the counter. "I wanted to ask about the hymn sheets," she said. The room leaned closer while pretending to study groceries. Nancy wiped her ink-stained finger on a cloth. "What about them?" "There was the first batch, the misprinted one." "Yes." "And then the corrected batch." "Yes. I printed those yesterday morning." "Who collected them?" Nancy's eyes moved just for a second towards the listeners. "Mrs. Vane." Agatha frowned. "Celia collected them herself?" "Yes. From here. Just after lunch. She checked one, tied the bundle up again, and took it away." "But you brought a bundle to the church last night." "That was the same corrected batch. She asked me to bring it to rehearsal because she wanted it approved properly in the vestry." "Why would she collect it and then have you bring it?" Nancy looked miserable. "Because Mrs. Vane liked making people do things twice." This was so accurate that several customers suddenly found the shelves fascinating. Agatha lowered her voice. "Was anyone else interested in the spoiled sheets?" Nancy hesitated. "Too long." "Who?" said Agatha. "I don't know that it matters." "It matters if someone killed Celia." There was a small gasp from Iris. Nancy went white. "I didn't say that." "No, I did." Agatha heard her own sharpness too late. It had come from impatience, and from the lingering memory of Celia's folded little smile, Nancy swallowed. "Someone asked whether I still had the old spoiled sheets." "Who?" "I didn't see clearly. It was busy." "In Carsely?" said Agatha. "During shop hours, you see who buys half a pound of ham from behind a pillar." Nancy's mouth tightened. Mrs. Mason murmured, "She did leave the counter yesterday, you know." Nancy turned. "What?" "Only for a little while." "I did not." "You went through the back." "To fetch more paper bags." "At the rehearsal break," said the choir member. "I remember because I came in for cough sweets, and there was no one at the till for a bit." "That was not 10 minutes," said Nancy. "No one said 10, said Agatha. The room went silent. Nancy stared at her. Agatha felt the old thrill of pressure, the sense that something had shifted underfoot. She pressed on. "So you did leave the counter for paper bags, and during that time someone could have taken spoiled hymn sheets." "I keep old printings in the back room," said Nancy. "But no one took anything. I'd have known." "Would you?" Nancy's eyes filled. "Mrs. Raisin, I made a spelling mistake. That is all I did." For a second, Agatha almost stopped. But pride is a poor break, and she was aware of the room watching her, measuring whether she could make sense of what Bill Wong had only begun to investigate. "You were humiliated by Celia," Agatha said, "in front of everyone." "So were you." The words struck cleanly. A faint rustle passed through the shop. Agatha flushed. "That is not the point." "Isn't it?" said Nancy. Her voice shook now. "Everyone heard her speak to me like I was stupid. Everyone laughed first and pitied me after. But that doesn't mean I followed her into the rain and pushed her down the steps. Nobody said pushed. You're making them think it." Agatha looked around. Mrs. Mason avoided her eyes. Iris Pomfrey clutched her handkerchief. Mr. Boggle set down his peaches as if they had become involved. Nancy picked up Agatha's groceries and began putting them into a paper bag with stiff, jerky movements. "There were 2 bundles," she said. "The spoiled sample batch and the corrected batch. Mrs. Vane kept 1 spoiled sheet at the meeting. Later, someone asked about old sheets. I don't know who. I didn't give anyone anything. That's all." Agatha paid. The coins sounded loud on the counter. As she left, she heard Mrs. Mason say softly, "Poor Nancy. Still, you never know what shame will do to a person." By lunchtime, the village knew that Nancy had left the counter for nearly 10 minutes. By 2 o'clock she had been seen near the churchyard path, though she had not. By tea, the story had grown legs, a hat, and a confident manner. Agatha sat in her cottage with Hodge on the arm of her chair, and Boswell glaring from the rug. She lit a cigarette and stared at the chocolate biscuits she had bought and no longer wanted. She had gone to the shop to ask questions. Instead, she had given Carsely a suspect. Chapter 5. Agatha's Superior Refreshments. Agatha woke the next morning with the unpleasant certainty that she had behaved badly. This did not mean she was ready to admit it. She made coffee too strong, smoked half a cigarette by the kitchen door, and informed Hodge and Boswell that Nancy Pargeter had been evasive, which was different from innocent. Hodge yawned. Boswell washed one paw with the grave concentration of a cat who had never ruined a woman's reputation before lunch. By 11, Agatha had chosen action over guilt. If Celia Vane had reduced her to Refreshments assistant, then Refreshments would become a triumph so magnificent that the village would be forced to revise its opinion. She telephoned Mrs. Bloxby, Iris Pomfrey, Beryl Gudgeon, and, after a short internal struggle, Nancy Pargeter. Nancy did not answer. By 2 o'clock, Agatha's cottage was crowded with cake stands, plates, napkins, labelled jars, and an atmosphere of aggressive improvement. "This," Agatha announced, "is how the tea should look." Mrs. Bloxby regarded the dining table with gentle concern. "It is certainly striking. That means good." "Not always," said Sir Charles Frayth, who had arrived without being invited and was now eating a shortbread biscuit. "Sometimes it means one has been hit by a bus. Put that down. Those are for display." "They display beautifully in the hand." Agatha ignored him. "The important thing is proportion. Cakes here, sandwiches there, plain biscuits at the back for people without imagination." Iris Pomfrey sat on the sofa, holding a cup of tea she had not drunk. She looked smaller outside the church, as if Celia's criticisms had followed her home and taken up space beside her. "Celia never liked fuss," Iris said. "Celia liked fuss when she was making it," said Agatha. Mrs. Bloxby's eyes flicked to her, but she did not correct her. Beryl Gudgeon moved quietly around the table, straightening spoons, folding cloths, and rescuing crumbs before anyone had finished making them. She had brought 2 loaves of fruit cake wrapped in greaseproof paper and an apology for not bringing more. "You don't have to work," Agatha told her. "You're here to advise." "Oh, I'm better if my hands are busy." "They're always busy," said Charles. "One fears they may one day apply for independence." Beryl gave a faint smile and folded a linen napkin into a neat, tight wedge, slipping it beneath the foot of a slightly uneven cake stand. The stand stopped wobbling. Agatha noticed it only because one of her best plates then slid off another stand. There was a crash. Hodge shot under the sideboard. Boswell sprang onto the table. Iris cried out. Charles rescued the shortbread. Mrs. Bloxby caught the teapot with astonishing speed. Agatha stared at the broken plate on the floor. "That," said Charles, "was striking. It was your fault. I was several feet away. Morally, you were involved." The cottage doorbell rang. Agatha, flushed and furious, opened it to find Bill Wong on the step. He looked past her at the chaos of cake stands, startled cats, and Charles Frayth holding biscuits. "I can come back," he said. "No," said Agatha. "This is exactly as controlled as it gets." Bill came in and accepted coffee. He did not accept cake, which Agatha took personally. "I wanted to speak with you about Nancy Pargeter," he said. "I asked questions. You did more than that. Did she complain?" "No!" she cried. Agatha looked away. Bill's voice remained steady. A catering order for a Women's Institute lunch was cancelled this morning. Someone said it would be awkward to buy food from her until things were clearer. That's ridiculous. Yes, I didn't tell anyone to cancel orders. You didn't have to. The room became uncomfortably quiet. Even Charles stopped eating. Agatha felt irritation rise, then shame behind it. Shame was worse. Irritation could be used. Shame just sat there, making one hot and clumsy. Nancy was evasive, she said. Maybe. Or frightened. There's a difference. Mrs. Bloxby said softly, "Fear often looks like guilt when people are already looking for guilt." Agatha hated that this sounded true. Bill finished his coffee and stood. "Ask questions if you must. But don't try people in the village shop." After he left, the little gathering had lost its comic energy. Iris excused herself, saying she had choir notes to sort. Mrs. Bloxby offered to help clear up, which Agatha refused too sharply. Charles lingered. "You don't have to look like that," he said. "Like what?" "Like someone has just discovered she owns a conscience." "Go away, Charles." In a moment. Beryl was folding the remaining cloths. Fold, press, turn. Fold, press, turn. Each one became a tidy square, and one smaller scrap of paper from Agatha's notes had somehow been folded into a wedge and tucked under a rocking saucer. Agatha frowned. "Beryl, why do you do that?" Do what? Fold things into little wedges. Oh? Beryl looked embarrassed. Habit. The parish hall tables wobble. So do the vicarage trays. Saves, spills. Charles glanced at Agatha. The ancient rural art of preventing tea from becoming a flood. Beryl gave another faint smile, but when Agatha said, "Celia mentioned the donation ledger, didn't she?" the smile vanished. "I really must get back," Beryl said. "Mrs. Bloxby will need the spare cloths." "She's just been here." "Yes? Well, there are always cloths." She left quickly, carrying her basket as if it contained something fragile. That evening, Agatha sat alone in her kitchen. The broken plate had been swept up. The cats had forgiven the disturbance after being bribed with food. Outside, the village lay damp and quiet under a thin veil of rain. Agatha lit a cigarette and let the day settle. Nancy had printed 2 batches, the spoiled sheets and the corrected sheets. Celia had collected the corrected bundle herself, then ordered Nancy to bring it again to the vestry. Someone had asked about old, spoiled sheets. The corrected sheets had disappeared. Celia had kept 1 misprinted sheet at the meeting, and Beryl, anxious Beryl, folded cloths and scraps and paper into precise little wedges because uneven trays bothered her. Agatha blew smoke towards the ceiling. It was probably nothing. But she had learned, painfully and repeatedly, that in Carsely nothing often sat quietly in a corner until it became something. Chapter 6. A hymn sheet under the bench. By the next morning, Agatha had made 2 decisions. The first was that she would not apologize to Nancy Pargeter until she knew whether she had been wrong. The second was that this was not cowardice, but method. Hodge and Boswell received these declarations over breakfast with the indifference of creatures who had never served on a parish committee. Agatha smoked by the back door, drank coffee, and tried not to think about Bill Wong's face when he had said, "You didn't have to." By 10:30 she was in the churchyard with Sir Charles Frayth. "Why am I here?" asked Charles. "Because you have nothing better to do." "I often have nothing better to do. It doesn't usually involve wet grass and moral effort." "Stop complaining and look useful." Carsely churchyard was quiet under a pale sky. Rain clung to the yews. The old stones leaned in the grass, names softened by weather and time. Beyond the wall, the vicarage garden showed a row of daffodils battered by the previous night's rain. Agatha stood near the side door and looked towards the vestry steps. Bill's people had been there and gone. The area was no longer sealed, though the stone still seemed to hold the memory of interruption. The step on which Celia was supposed to have slipped had looked too clean. Agatha could not shake that. "She came from the nave," Agatha said, "through the passage, out the side door, and down the steps." "Unless she didn't," said Charles. "That is the sort of remark people make when they want credit for thinking." "I do want credit. It is one of my few needs." Agatha ignored him. She walked slowly along the path towards the churchyard bench, a damp wooden thing set beneath a yew, facing the vicarage lawn. From there one could see the side door, the vestry steps, and part of the lane behind the hall. "She might have been meeting someone," Agatha said. "Romantic? Celia Vane? Don't be revolting. Blackmail, then. Or control." She liked control better than money. Charles bent to brush mud from his trouser cuff. "That is because she had no imagination." Agatha was about to snap at him when she noticed something pale beneath the bench. Not on the ground. Tucked under a loose stone by one of the bench legs, she crouched. "Don't touch it," Charles said. "I know that. You say that with the confidence of a woman about to touch it." Agatha took a tissue from her handbag and eased out the folded paper. It was a hymn sheet. Not a clean one. Not one of the corrected batch. The line on the closing hymn still read hats in humble praise. The sheet had been folded lengthwise, then folded again into a narrow wedge. Most of it was dry, although one corner was damp and soft. Near the middle was a faint crescent-shaped brown mark. "Tea," said Agatha. Charles leaned closer. "You can identify tea at 20 paces? I've been insulted beside enough cups of it." The stain was small, curved, and oddly neat, as if made by the rim of a cup or saucer. The fold was too deliberate for a dropped sheet. It had been made to fit somewhere. "A marker?" said Charles. "Perhaps. Or a wedge. Beryl folds things like this. Beryl folds everything like this." "Yes," said Agatha slowly. "She does." Charles looked towards the vicarage. "You are not about to accuse the village's most useful woman of murder, I hope." "I am not accusing anyone." "Excellent. Shall we have that engraved?" Agatha slipped the hymn sheet carefully into her notebook. Bill would scold her. Bill scolded her anyway. At least now she would have something worth being scolded over. They followed the path behind the vicarage, past dripping hedges and a narrow lane where delivery vans left muddy tracks. A gate led back towards the parish hall. Anyone moving between the hall, the shop road, and the churchyard could have done so without crossing the main village green. Celia could have been lured here, Agatha said. With a misprinted hymn sheet? With a note written on one, perhaps. "Come to the bench. Bring standards." Very funny. I thought so. By midday, the Red Lion had filled with people who had urgent errands and no intention of leaving. The fire was lit, though not needed, and the room smelled of beer, damp wool, and chips. Agatha and Charles took a corner table. The village chorus was already in voice. Mrs. Mason sat with 2 other women near the bar. Iris Pomfrey was drinking tomato juice as if it were medicine. Patrick Mallow stood by the fireplace, admiring an old brass warming-pan and probably valuing it. Rupert Cottle occupied a table near the window, with papers spread before him, performing busyness for an audience. "Poor Nancy," said one woman. "Poor Celia," corrected Mrs. Mason, but without much force. "No one is saying Nancy meant to do it." "That is exactly how people begin saying someone meant to do it," said Agatha from her corner. The nearby tables went quiet. Mrs. Mason coloured. "We were only talking. Carsely's most dangerous pastime." Charles smiled into his drink. Iris Pomfrey said tremulously, "Nancy was very upset after the meeting." "So was I," said Agatha. "No one has accused me yet." "That," said Charles, "may be an oversight." Agatha kicked him under the table. Patrick Mallow turned from the fireplace. "One mustn't be too quick to condemn. Grief produces strange behaviour." His hand moved to the brass warming-pan as he spoke, fingers stroking the rim. Rupert Cottle looked up. "Indeed. Though from a practical standpoint, Mrs. Pargeter had access to both print runs." "And you had access to the church?" said Agatha. Rupert smiled. "As a consultant, Mrs. Raisin. Not a burglar. Did you measure damp in the vestry during rehearsal?" "I inspected several areas." "With whose key?" His smile thinned. "Churches are not Fort Knox." Mrs. Mason whispered something that included the words Nancy and shame. Agatha heard them and felt an unpleasant twist inside. She had helped this. She could blame the village all she liked, but she had handed them the first stone and watched them admire its weight. Charles leaned towards her. "You've gone quiet." "I am thinking." "Ah. Shall I alert the landlord?" "Shut up!" But she was grateful for the joke, because otherwise she might have had to admit she felt miserable. At the bar, the landlord said, "Patrick, you left your coat here the other night before you came in." Patrick turned too quickly. "Did I? On the peg by the back door. Thought it was odd. It was raining. I must have dropped it in earlier. You weren't here earlier." The room stirred. Patrick laughed lightly and touched the warming pan again. "My dear fellow, in a village pub, time is a flexible concept." Agatha filed that away. Still, the hymn sheet in her notebook mattered more. A misprinted sheet, dry under a bench after rain. A careful fold. A tea stain shaped like a crescent. Someone had kept the spoiled paper, carried it, used it, hidden it. Not Nancy, perhaps. Or not only Nancy. When Agatha left the Red Lion, Mrs. Mason was still talking. By evening, Carsely would have improved the story again. This time, Agatha intended to improve faster. Chapter 7. Agatha's Big Mistake. Agatha went to Evesham to have her hair done, because murder was no excuse for looking neglected. The salon was called Gloss, which Agatha disliked on principle but tolerated because the young woman who did her hair was quick, discreet, and capable of making Agatha feel 5 years younger without saying so. Unfortunately, discretion was not one of the services offered by the other customers. By the time Agatha had been shampooed and wrapped in a black cape, the woman in the next chair was saying, "Of course, my cousin's neighbour was in Carsely that evening. She says Nancy Pargeter vanished from the shop during the rehearsal break." Agatha opened one eye. The hairdresser hesitated with the comb. "Don't stop," said Agatha. The woman in the next chair lowered her voice, which made every word clearer. "And not just for paper bags. She was seen near the lane behind the parish hall." "By whom?" asked Agatha. The woman blinked at the mirror. "I don't know. Someone reliable." "Someone reliable usually has a name." "Well, I only heard." "That is the advantage of gossip," said Agatha. "It needn't carry luggage." The woman sniffed and returned to her magazine, but the damage was done. Agatha sat under the dryer and let the story harden in her mind. Nancy leaving the shop. The spoiled hymn sheets in the back room. The missing corrected batch. The dry, misprinted sheet hidden under the churchyard bench. She told herself she was following evidence. She did not tell herself that she still smarted from Nancy saying, "So were you." On the drive back to Carsely, rain swept the windscreen in thin silver lines. By the time Agatha reached the parish hall, volunteers were setting out tables for the postponed fundraiser meeting. The village had decided, with typical resilience, that Celia's death was tragic, but the roof still leaked. Nancy was unloading boxes from a small van. Agatha pulled up too sharply. "Nancy." Nancy turned. Her face closed at once. "Mrs. Raisin, I need to ask you something. I'm busy. This won't take long." It always does. A few heads turned. Beryl Gudgeon paused in the hall doorway with a tray of cups. Iris Pomfrey stood near the notice board. Mrs. Mason, who had been carrying nothing useful, became suddenly very still. Agatha knew she should move Nancy aside. She knew it, and ignored it. "Were you in the lane behind the parish hall during the rehearsal break?" Nancy stared. "What?" "You told me you went to fetch paper bags." "I did. But someone says you were seen near the lane." "Someone says many things." "Did you take spoiled hymn sheets from your back room?" "No." "Did you give them to anyone?" "No." "Did you meet Celia by the churchyard bench?" Nancy's colour rose. "How dare you?" Beryl set down the tray. One cup rattled. Agatha pressed on, hating the audience but using it all the same. A misprinted hymn sheet was found hidden near the bench. Nancy's mouth opened. Mrs. Mason whispered, "Oh, my." Agatha heard the whisper and should have stopped. Instead, she felt the horrible little pride of having produced an effect. "You knew about the misprint," Agatha said. "You knew Celia had kept one sheet. You had access to the rest. So did half the parish once they were passed round. You were humiliated. So were you. The words rang out across the hall entrance. For a second, nobody moved. Nancy's eyes filled. You don't care what happened to Mrs. Vane. You care that she made you look small, and now you're making me look smaller. Agatha flinched, as if slapped. That is not true. It is exactly true. Nancy pushed past her, leaving one box on the pavement. A packet of paper napkins split and scattered in the wet. Beryl hurried after her. Iris picked up the napkins with trembling hands. Mrs. Mason had already turned towards the green, carrying the news in her face. Sir Charles Frayth appeared from the Red Lion side of the lane, took in the scene, and said nothing. This was so unlike him that Agatha felt worse. "What?" she snapped. "I was only wondering whether you meant to do that." "Do what?" "Put a match to dry straw." Agatha looked towards the shop. Nancy had gone inside and shut the door. By evening, Carsely had improved the story again. Agatha had found proof. Nancy had been seen fleeing. The hymn-sheet had come from her own hands. Celia had threatened to ruin her, and Nancy had ruined Celia first. None of this had been said exactly. That hardly mattered. Bill Wong came to Agatha's cottage just after 7. Hodge sat in the window. Boswell took one look at Bill and walked away, having no interest in law enforcement. Agatha let Bill in, and made coffee neither of them wanted. "I hear you confronted Nancy again," he said. "People tell you things quickly. When you shout them in front of the parish hall, yes. I did not shout. Agatha. She lied about leaving the shop. Perhaps. And there was a hymn-sheet near the bench. You should have given that to me. I was going to." "When? After showing it round the Red Lion?" Agatha looked away. Bill's voice softened, which was worse than anger. "Nancy has lost another order. Someone pushed a note through her door calling her a killer." Agatha went still. "I didn't do that." "No. But you made it easier for someone else to. The kitchen seemed suddenly smaller. The rain ticked against the window. Hodge jumped down, padded to Agatha's ankle, and rubbed against it with rare sympathy." Agatha swallowed. "I thought I was right. You may be right about something. That doesn't mean you're right about her." Bill stood. "What should I do?" she asked, and hated how small the question sounded. "Start by not giving the village a villain because it wants one." After he left, Agatha remained at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, except for the refrigerator's hum and Boswell crunching food in the next room. She lit a cigarette, took one drag, and put it out. Nancy's words would not leave her. "You care that she made you look small." Agatha had believed she was investigating Celia Vane's death, but part of her had been dragging Celia's insult behind her like a tin can tied to a wedding car, noisy and ridiculous. For the first time, Agatha wondered whether the clue she had missed was not on a hymn-sheet, or a step, or a shop counter. Perhaps it was in herself. Chapter 8. Mrs. Bloxby's quiet correction. Agatha did not sleep well. At 3 in the morning she woke convinced that Nancy Pargeter was guilty. At 4 she was equally certain Nancy was innocent. At 5 Hodge knocked a book from the bedside table, and Agatha told him that if he had any views on misprinted hymn-sheets, now was the time to express them. Hodge blinked and washed his shoulder. By breakfast, Agatha had reached the stage of guilt that demanded movement. She dressed plainly, which for Agatha meant expensively, but without scarlet, and walked to the vicarage through a morning of pale sun and damp hedges. Mrs. Bloxby opened the door before Agatha could knock twice. "I wondered when you might come," she said. "That sounds ominous." It was meant to sound welcoming. "Then you need practice." Mrs. Bloxby smiled and led her into the sitting-room. It was a comfortable room, full of books, parish papers, faded cushions, and the faint smell of furniture polish and tea. Reverend Bloxby sat at a small desk by the window, sorting envelopes into piles with the hopeless patience of a man who knew the envelopes would breed overnight. Agatha sat down. "I have made a mess," she said. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea. "Yes." Agatha stared at her. "You might have softened that. I could have. But you would have heard the truth underneath and disliked me for wrapping it." Reverend Bloxby looked up. "My dear, that is dangerously close to efficient pastoral care." Mrs. Bloxby handed Agatha a cup. "Nancy is frightened. So is the village. Fear likes a name. And I gave it one. You helped it along." Agatha put the cup down untouched. "I thought the misprinted sheet pointed to her." "Perhaps it points first to paper," said Mrs. Bloxby, "and only later to a person." This was exactly the sort of sentence Agatha usually distrusted, because it sounded gentle while refusing to be simple. Reverend Bloxby came over with a folder. "I found something you may wish to see. Celia was going through appeal papers before she died. She told me she intended to announce a small matter of honesty at the fundraiser." "Whose honesty?" "She would not say. She said public accountability was the only cure for private weakness." "Typical," said Agatha. "Did she enjoy being unbearable, or was it a vocation?" The vicar sighed. Celia believed she was defending standards. Standards have a lot to answer for. Mrs. Bloxby opened the folder and drew out the donation ledger. The entries were neat. Names, amounts, dates, small notes. Agatha scanned the page, impatient with columns, until one caught her eye. A donation from a local family had been recorded, crossed out, corrected, and entered again 2 weeks later. "Who made this correction?" "Beryl," said Mrs. Bloxby. "She helps with the records when my eyes are tired." "Why correct it?" Reverend Bloxby looked unhappy. "The money was borrowed and returned." "Borrowed from the appeal?" "Only for a few days. It was wrong, of course, but it was repaid before the account was submitted." "By whom?" Mrs. Bloxby's voice was quiet. "A young relative of Beryl's. Someone foolish, not wicked. Beryl altered the record to make the timing look cleaner than it was." Agatha sat back. "Celia found out." "We believe so." "And was going to announce it?" "At a public fundraiser," said the vicar. "In the name of honesty." Agatha imagined Beryl's small, anxious face, her busy hands, the way she answered questions by offering tea, cloths, biscuits, anything except herself. "Beryl wouldn't kill anyone," she said, then immediately disliked herself for saying it. She had heard villagers say much the same of Nancy until it became inconvenient. Mrs. Bloxby did not contradict her. "Beryl has carried other people's troubles for many years. Sometimes people who seem humble are simply very tired of being exposed." Agatha looked at the ledger again. "What about Rupert?" Celia challenged his invoices. "Yes, and Patrick's plaque." "Yes, both better motives." "Bigger motives, perhaps," said Mrs. Bloxby. "Not always deeper ones." The phrase irritated Agatha because she knew it was useful. Reverend Bloxby rubbed his forehead. "Beryl came by yesterday, asking if we had found all the papers from the vestry. She said she wanted to tidy the remaining things." "That's normal for Beryl." "Yes." It was the third time she asked. Agatha looked up. Mrs. Bloxby said, "She also asked whether anyone had mentioned the vicarage saucers." "The saucers?" "Our old tea set, scalloped edges. Quite chipped, but Beryl refuses to throw them out, because they were donated by Miss Sims in 1978, and therefore have achieved parish immortality." Agatha remembered the crescent-shaped stain on the hymn sheet under the bench. "Do your saucers leave marks?" she asked. "Everything in a parish leaves marks eventually," said Reverend Bloxby. Agatha stood abruptly. "I need to see the linen cupboard." Mrs. Bloxby did not ask why. She led Agatha into the narrow passage by the kitchen. The cupboard smelled of lavender sachets and starch. Inside were folded cloths, spare napkins, tea towels, and old table coverings, all stacked with almost military precision. Agatha pulled out a cloth. Beneath it lay a small folded piece of cream paper, wedged under a shelf bracket to stop the shelf rocking. She eased it out. It was not a full hymn sheet, only a torn half, but the type was the same. The closing line was visible. "Hats in humble praise." Agatha and Mrs. Bloxby looked at each other. "Well?" said Agatha. Mrs. Bloxby's face showed no triumph, only sadness. Agatha felt the case shift. Not solve itself, not yet. But Nancy's shape inside it had begun to fade, and another shape, smaller and more frightened, had moved into view. She thought of Beryl folding cloths into wedges, folding Agatha's scrap paper, folding herself into usefulness so no one would notice where fear had gone. "I owe Nancy an apology," Agatha said. "Yes," said Mrs. Bloxby, "and I hate that." "I know." Agatha folded the torn hymn-sheet carefully and placed it in her bag. Outside, Carsely's church bell struck 11. The sound crossed the village cleanly, over shop, pub, hall, and cottage, touching everyone equally for once. Agatha stood at the vicarage gate and looked towards Nancy Pargeter's shop. She had come seeking proof that someone else was guilty. Instead, she had found proof that she had been. Chapter 9. The Plaque and the Paper. Agatha apologized to Nancy Pargeter shortly after breakfast. She did it in the village shop, where she had first made the damage worse, because private apologies were comfortable and public harm was not. Nancy stood behind the counter, arms folded, her face pale with suspicion. Mrs. Mason was near the bread. Mr. Bogle was pretending to compare marmalade. 2 other villagers had appeared from nowhere, drawn by that ancient instinct which told Carsely when discomfort might be available free of charge. "I was wrong," said Agatha. Nancy stared. Agatha forced herself on. "I pushed too hard. I made people think things I had no right to make them think. I am sorry." The shop was silent. Then Mr. Bogle said, "Well, that's something." Mrs. Mason gave him a look, annoyed that he had spoken before she could decide whether forgiveness was appropriate. Nancy's mouth trembled. "Do you mean it?" "Yes," said Agatha. "Don't be tiresome." Nancy gave a small, unwilling laugh, and the air shifted. Agatha bought eggs, coffee, cat food, and an unnecessary number of biscuits to prove confidence in the establishment. By the time she left, Carsely was already rearranging itself. People who had been quite certain Nancy was guilty began remembering that they had always had doubts. Agatha found this so irritating she nearly withdrew the apology. Instead, she drove to Mercester. Patrick Mallow's antiques room occupied the back of a narrow shop that smelled of beeswax, dust, and expensive decay. Chairs with thin legs stood in corners. Gilt mirrors reflected one another until the room seemed full of watching faces. Patrick himself emerged from behind a walnut cabinet, smiling in a velvet jacket. "Mrs. Raisin, what an unexpected pleasure." "I doubt it." His smile dipped. "Coffee?" "No." "Tea?" "Definitely not." Sir Charles stepped in behind her. "I'll have coffee." "You were not invited to refreshment," said Agatha. "I was invited by hope." Patrick looked from one to the other and became less comfortable. Agatha moved to a small table where a framed photograph of the church restoration display lay beside several catalogues. "You undervalued the memorial plaque," she said. Patrick touched the edge of the table. "That is a serious accusation. So is murder." "I thought I'd warm up." Charles sat in a carved chair and immediately looked as if he had been born there. Do answer. She becomes louder if made to wait. Patrick's charm thinned. The plaque was damaged, but saleable. With restoration, perhaps? And you intended to buy it cheaply through the appeal, and sell it, dear, through one of your tasteful little contacts. Patrick's fingers moved to a brass candlestick. I assist many churches with unwanted items. Unwanted by whom? The dead? His face hardened. Mrs. Vane misunderstood the matter. No, said Agatha. She understood it perfectly. That's why she threatened you. Patrick walked to the window. Mercester traffic crawled beyond the glass, ordinary and indifferent. I did not kill Celia Vane, he said. Where were you before she died? At the Red Lion. Your coat was there before you were. He turned quickly. Agatha pounced. You left it on the peg by the back door earlier, didn't you? So people would remember your coat and assume you were there. That is absurd. It is also exactly the sort of thing a man who touches furniture before lying would do, Charles murmured. That was rather good. Shut up. Patrick's shoulders sagged. He looked suddenly older, less polished, and much more frightened. All right, he said. I was not at the pub the entire time. Agatha's pulse quickened. I went to meet Mrs. Vane, he said. But not to harm her. She had sent word that she wanted to discuss the plaque before she made a public complaint. With a note? No. A message through Beryl. Agatha's gaze sharpened. Beryl? She said Mrs. Vane wanted me to come to the churchyard after rehearsal began. Near the bench. I went. Mrs. Vane never appeared. Did you see anyone? No. Did you find a hymn sheet? Patrick hesitated. Agatha leaned forward. I saw a piece of paper under the bench, he said. Folded. I did not touch it. Why not? Because I had no desire to be involved in whatever game Mrs. Vane was playing. But you were involved. In bad judgment, said Patrick bitterly. Not murder. Agatha believed him, which annoyed her. His dishonesty was neat, selfish, and plausible, but not quite the right shape. Patrick had been frightened of exposure. Beryl had been frightened of ruin. Still, Agatha had one more card to play. She opened her handbag and took out a blank envelope. Celia left a note, she said. About the plaque. Patrick went grey. Charles glanced at her with admiration. There was no note. There had never been a note. But Patrick did not know that. What did she say? He whispered. That you had undervalued church property, misled the committee, and hoped to profit from parish trust. Patrick sat down heavily. She had no proof. That sounds very like a confession. He covered his face with one hand. I meant to repay the difference quietly. I swear it. I only wanted the thing sold properly. There is no market here for damaged memorial brass. Agatha snapped the envelope shut. Thank you, she said. Patrick lowered his hand. There is no note, is there? No. Charles stood. But look how useful it might have been. Patrick's anger returned. You people play at detection as if lives are not being broken. Agatha flinched. Not because Patrick deserved sympathy particularly, but because the words had struck an old bruise from the shop. They left with Patrick's confession to fraud, or something close to it, but without murder. At the Red Lion, Agatha and Charles took refuge in the back bar. The lunchtime crowd had thinned. Rain streaked the windows. The landlord polished glasses with the resigned air of a man who knew clean glass did not improve human nature. Well, said Charles, half a triumph. I hate half a triumph. You should try aristocracy. We live on them. Agatha spread the 3 papers on the small table. Her notes, the folded hymn sheet from under the churchyard bench, and the torn piece from the vicarage linen cupboard. "The bench sheet was planted," she said. "Patrick saw it. Celia may have been lured there. But Patrick didn't write the message. Because there was no message? There may have been one on another sheet, or spoken through Beryl." Charles looked at the folded paper. "Tea stain?" Agatha tapped the crescent mark. "Not from here." The landlord, passing with a tray, looked down. "That's not one of ours." Agatha looked up. "What? Mark like that? Too neat. Our mugs leave big round stains. Parish hall cups are worse. Chip on half of them." Agatha starred at the crescent. Charles said softly, "Vicarage saucers. Mrs. Bloxby's old scalloped saucers. Chipped, parish immortal, and often handled by Beryl." Agatha remembered Beryl folding linen into wedges. Beryl asking about papers. Beryl moving through every room as if usefulness made her invisible. Beryl carrying a message to Patrick. Beryl, knowing Celia, meant to expose a corrected donation record. The false solution fell away. Patrick had cheated the church. Rupert might have padded invoices. Nancy had printed a mistake. But the paper had passed through the vicarage hands. The fold was Beryl's fold. The stain was Beryl's tea. The fear was Beryl's fear. Agatha sat back. "Oh, hell," she said. Charles looked at her with rare seriousness. "You think it's her. I think Celia was going to shame her in public. I think Beryl panicked. I think she used what everyone already laughed at, the misprinted hymn sheet." Agatha nodded. "Hats in humble praise," she said, "and everyone looking in the wrong direction." Outside, the rain eased. Inside, the Red Lion returned to its ordinary sounds. Glasses, low voices, chairs scraping, someone ordering chips. Agatha folded the papers carefully. This time she would not shout in a shop. She would not feed the village another easy villain. This time she would have to make the truth stand up in front of everyone. Chapter 10. The last verse at the parish hall. The fundraiser was reconvened on Saturday afternoon with the desperate cheerfulness of a village determined not to let murder interfere with cake. The parish hall had been polished, aired, and decorated with bunting that drooped at one end, despite Beryl Gudgeon's repeated attempts to pin it into obedience. The tea-urns steamed. Plates of sandwiches waited under damp cloths. A stack of corrected hymn sheets lay on the entrance table, guarded by Reverend Bloxby as if they might bolt. Agatha arrived in a plain, dark suit. This alarmed several people, more than Scarlet would have done. Nancy Pargeter stood by the shop's contribution of biscuits, looking ready to flinch. Conversations dipped when Agatha crossed the room. Mrs. Mason stared into her teacup. Iris Pomfrey adjusted the choir folder in her hands. Rupert Cottle was absent, wisely. Patrick Mallow stood near the door, with the expression of a man hoping nobody would mention memorial plaques ever again. Sir Charles Frayth leaned against the wall. "Funeral colours?" he murmured. "Shut up. Contrition colours? Charles." He smiled faintly. "Much better. I was afraid you'd lost your edge." Agatha walked straight to Nancy. The room noticed. "Nancy," said Agatha, loudly enough for the nearest tables to hear, "I owe you another apology." Nancy's eyes widened. "You already." "Yes, but Carsely needs things repeated before it believes them. I was wrong to suggest you had anything to do with Celia's death. The hymn sheets were used, but not by you." The silence grew heavy. Mrs. Mason put down her cup. Nancy's face trembled. "Thank you," she said. Agatha turned to the room. "And since several of you helped spread the story, you might consider buying something from Nancy's shop before the day is out." "That," murmured Charles, "was almost noble. Almost is all I can manage." Reverend Bloxby cleared his throat. "Perhaps we might begin." "No," said Agatha. The vicar blinked. "No? Not yet." Bill Wong, who had entered quietly through the side door, gave Agatha a warning look. She gave him one back that said she knew exactly what she was doing. This was not strictly true, but she had evidence enough to risk the expression. Mrs. Bloxby stood near the tea-table, calm and sad. Beryl Gudgeon was beside her, folding a cloth, unfolding it, then folding it again. Agatha took 3 papers from her handbag. "This started," she said, "with a misprint." A nervous rustle went round the hall. "The first hymn sheet asked us to lift our hats in humble praise instead of our hearts." Everyone laughed. Celia Vane did not. She kept one spoiled sheet as a reminder of standards. "Poor Nancy was mortified," said Iris softly. "Yes," said Agatha. "And because Nancy was mortified, we all found it easy to believe she might have done something desperate. I helped that along. Nobody contradicted her. People rarely interrupted a confession when it might become an accusation." Agatha held up the first sheet. "This is from the spoiled batch. The joke. The public mistake." Then she held up the folded hymn sheet from the churchyard bench. "This one was found tucked beneath a loose stone near the bench, where rain should have ruined it. It was folded into a narrow wedge. Not dropped, placed." Beryl's hands stopped. Agatha held up the torn piece from the vicarage linen cupboard. "And this was found in the vicarage, used to steady a shelf. Same paper, same misprint, same careful fold." Mrs. Mason whispered, "But who would do that?" Agatha looked at Beryl. "Someone who steadies things. Cups, trays, shelves, wobbly tables. Someone so useful that nobody notices what passes through her hands." Beryl shook her head once. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do." Bill moved slightly closer, but did not interrupt. Agatha continued, quieter now. "Celia had found the correction in the donation ledger. She knew money had been borrowed from the appeal and repaid late. She knew you altered the record to protect your relative." Beryl's face crumpled. "It was repaid," she whispered. "I know. He was frightened. He had debts. It was only a few days. I know that too. Celia said she would announce it, in front of everyone. She said honesty had to be seen." Reverend Bloxby closed his eyes briefly. Agatha's voice softened despite herself. "So you sent messages. One to Patrick, making him think Celia wanted to meet about the plaque. Perhaps others too. You created confusion around the churchyard bench. You used the spoiled hymn sheets because everyone already knew they existed and everyone would look first at Nancy." "No," said Beryl, but the word was weak. "You lured Celia to the side steps during the blackout," said Agatha. "You knew the church, the passage, the old stones. You staged a fall where people would believe a fall could happen. Then you wiped the step because it showed the wrong mud, or no mud, or some mark that did not fit an accident. But you wiped it too clean." The room held its breath. Bill said gently, "Mrs. Gudgeon." Beryl's hands twisted the cloth. "She was going to ruin him," she said. "He is not bad, only foolish." She would have stood there with her folder and said it before everyone. His mother would have heard. His employer would have heard. People would never have let it rest. Nancy covered her mouth. Beryl looked around the hall as if seeing every face individually and fearing each one. "I only wanted to stop her speaking. I thought if she came outside I could beg her." But she laughed. She said mercy was just cowardice with a soft voice. Mrs. Bloxby's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Beryl's voice became small. She turned to go back in. I caught her sleeve. She slipped. Then she was at the bottom. I knew no one would believe me. I knew what they would say, so I made it look like an accident." Agatha did not move. The confession had not brought triumph. It had brought the sad, stale smell of fear. "And the hymn-sheet?" Bill asked. Beryl swallowed. "I had written a note on one, asking her to come out. I took it back. I thought I had taken them all. I must have dropped one by the bench. Later I tried to tidy the papers." "Tidy," said Agatha, almost under her breath. That was what Beryl did. She tidied spills, shame, ledgers, trays, and finally death, until the tidying became the thing that exposed her. Bill stepped forward. "Beryl Gudgeon, I need you to come with me." Beryl did not resist. Mrs. Bloxby went to her and took the cloth from her hands. For a second the two women stood close together, the vicar's wife and the helper who had carried half the parish's burdens in silence. "I'm sorry," Beryl whispered. "I know," said Mrs. Bloxby, "but sorry cannot undo it." Bill led her out gently. No one spoke until the door closed. Then Carsely did what villages do when shame has entered the room. It looked at the floor, adjusted cups, and waited for someone else to decide what feeling was permitted. Reverend Bloxby finally said, "We shall still sing." His voice shook only slightly. Iris Pomfrey opened her folder. The choir gathered. Nancy handed out the corrected hymn-sheets herself, and this time nobody laughed. Agatha took one and read the final line, "Hearts in humble praise." Across the hall, Charles watched her. "Well?" he said softly. Agatha folded the sheet once, then stopped herself. "Well, what? Do you feel better?" Agatha looked at Nancy, at Mrs. Bloxby, at the closed door through which Beryl had gone. "No," she said, "but I feel less wrong." Charles nodded. "That may be more useful." The choir began uncertainly, then found its way. The sound rose into the parish hall, not grand, not perfect, but human enough. Agatha stood with the hymn-sheet in her hand and did not sing. For once, listening seemed the better thing. Chapter 11. A corrected sheet. By Monday morning, Carsely had begun repairing itself in the usual order. Visible damage first, conscience later. The parish hall was swept. The bunting came down. The tea-urns were returned to the cupboard, polished to a shine by a team of women who spoke very little and dried everything twice. Reverend Bloxby announced that the restoration appeal would continue, though perhaps with fewer committees and more prayer. Nobody objected. Committees, for the moment, had lost their charm. Agatha went first to the village shop. Nancy Pargeter was behind the counter, arranging tins of soup into a display of excessive straightness. She looked tired, but not defeated. A small handwritten sign by the till read, "Parish. Orders welcome." "Subtle," said Agatha. Nancy looked up. "I thought subtle had done enough damage." Agatha smiled. "Quite right." She filled a basket with coffee, bread, milk, cat food, cleaning cloths, biscuits, and a jar of marmalade she did not want. Then she added 2 boxes of tea. "You don't have to buy the whole shop," said Nancy. "I am not buying the whole shop. I am making a point. You usually do." "Yes, but this one is useful." Nancy rang up the items. For a moment neither woman spoke. Then Nancy said, "People have started coming back." "Of course they have. They always knew you were innocent." Nancy gave her a look. Agatha sighed. "No, they didn't. But they will pretend they did until it becomes memory." "That sounds like Carsely." "It is practically the village motto." Nancy's mouth twitched. Agatha took her bags. "If anyone cancels another order, send them to me. To be persuaded, to be frightened into good manners. That may work better." Outside, the village was bright after rain. Sunlight touched the honey-coloured stone cottages and turned the puddles along the lane into little mirrors. A man Agatha barely knew nodded too warmly, as if he had never repeated Nancy's name with relish over a pint. Mrs. Mason crossed the green carrying eggs, and an expression of revised certainty. "I always felt it wasn't Nancy," she said. "No, you didn't," said Agatha. Mrs. Mason blinked. Agatha walked on before apology could become discussion. At home, Hodge and Boswell inspected the shopping bags with grave professional interest. Boswell attempted to climb into one, failed, and blamed the bag. Hodge found the biscuits and sat on them. "Typical," said Agatha. "The only males in my life who are loyal, and even they are mainly loyal to packaging." She made coffee, lit a cigarette, and sat at the kitchen table. On the table lay one corrected hymn-sheet. Mrs. Bloxby had given it to her after the fundraiser, not ceremonially, but almost shyly. "I thought you might want one without the mistake," she had said. Agatha had almost replied that she collected mistakes of her own and needed no printed assistance. Instead, she had taken it. Now she unfolded it and read the final line again. "Hearts in humble praise." The right word looked ordinary, almost dull. Yet the wrong word had travelled through the village like a spark in dry thatch. Hats had become laughter. Laughter had become humiliation. Humiliation had become suspicion. Suspicion had become cruelty, because cruelty was easier when everyone could call it concern. Agatha did not like moral lessons. They usually arrived wearing sensible shoes and expecting tea, but this one sat down without asking and would not leave. She had been wrong about Nancy because she had wanted to be right about Celia. Worse, she had wanted her own hurt to mean something clever. It was not a comfortable discovery. A knock came at the door. Sir Charles Frayth entered without waiting, carrying a paper bag from the bakery. "I brought buns," he said. "You might have waited to be invited." "I might have, yes." He put the bag on the table and looked at the hymn-sheet. "Keeping souvenirs now? Reminders. How wholesome. Shall I fetch a priest?" "Don't be tiresome." He sat opposite her, opened the bag, and removed the best bun before offering her one. "Do you know," he said, "for a brief moment at the Hall you were almost admirable. I hope you recovered." With difficulty, Agatha took a bun. "Beryl? Bill says she has made a statement." Agatha looked away. "Poor woman." "Poor Celia, too," said Charles. Agatha was silent. It was true. Celia had been cruel, controlling, and vain in the dreariest possible way. She had also been alive. She had owned a navy suit, a folder of standards, a sharp tongue, and perhaps some secret private fear no one had bothered to discover because being disliked made her convenient. Murder did not improve its victim. It only ended the chance of understanding her. At noon, Agatha walked to the vicarage. Mrs. Bloxby was in the garden, cutting back dead stems. Her face was pale but composed. "Agatha," she said, "come and sit." They sat on the bench by the lawn where the fundraiser had nearly taken place, before everything had broken around it. The churchyard was visible beyond the hedge. The side steps could not be seen from here, and Agatha was grateful. "How is Alf?" Agatha asked. "Sad. Angry, though he would not call it that. He thinks anger should be better dressed. And you?" "Sad too." Mrs. Bloxby clipped a dead head from a plant and held it in her gloved hand. "Beryl helped here for years," she said. She knew where everything was kept. Cloths, keys, spare candles, old saucers, ledgers. One can mistake being useful for being known. Agatha thought of Beryl folding herself smaller and smaller until fear had nowhere to go. "I should have seen more," Agatha said. We all say that after harm is done, but I made it worse for Nancy. Yes, said Mrs. Bloxby. Agatha winced. And then you made it better, Mrs. Bloxby added. Not perfectly, but publicly. Public apologies are ghastly. That may be why they have value. A silence, settled, companionable, and not quite comfortable. From the church came the sound of Reverend Bloxby moving chairs. A rook called from the yew tree. Somewhere beyond the lane, a lawn-mower started, stopped, and started again with the stubborn optimism of English machinery. Agatha said, "I am finished with parish committees." Mrs. Bloxby smiled. "Of course. I mean it. I know. And if anyone asks me to organize refreshments again, I shall refuse." Naturally. They both looked towards the parish hall. Agatha narrowed her eyes. "Although someone ought to prevent Mrs. Mason from choosing the biscuits." Mrs. Bloxby said nothing. "That is not agreement," said Agatha. "No, but it is not disagreement either. It is pastoral silence." Agatha laughed, despite herself. By Sunday, Carsely had resumed its shape. People went to church, bought newspapers, walked dogs, trimmed hedges, and discussed the Restoration appeal in lowered voices. Nancy's shop grew busy again. Patrick Mallow's name was mentioned with disapproval and interest. Rupert Cottle's invoices were subjected to scrutiny so fierce that the south wall might have been cheaper to rebuild in gold. Agatha kept the corrected hymn-sheet in a drawer at home. Not as a trophy. She had no taste for that. She kept it because it reminded her that a small mistake can be harmless until people make use of it. Paper did not accuse Nancy. Ink did not shame Beryl. A misprint did not kill Celia Vane. People had done those things. And yet, when Hodge and Boswell claimed the best chair that afternoon, when Charles stole the last decent biscuit, and when Mrs. Bloxby telephoned to ask whether Agatha might possibly attend one very small planning discussion about future fundraising, Agatha found herself saying, "I'll come, but I am not helping." Then she put down the receiver and lit a cigarette. "Not helping," she told the cats. Hodge opened one eye. Boswell looked unconvinced. So, if Agatha was honest, was she? Here we leave Carsely, outwardly restored and inwardly a little wiser. The urns were polished, the hymn-sheets corrected, and several villagers began saying they had never truly suspected Nancy Pargeter, which was not quite true. Villages have long memories, but they also edit quickly when embarrassment is involved. The misprinted hymn-sheet remained a small, foolish object. Paper, ink, and one wrong word. Yet in Agatha's hands it became a reminder that the smallest error can expose the largest lie, especially when everyone is eager for an easy culprit. There is a particular danger in respectable certainty. It lets kind people join a cruel chorus and call it common sense. Still, by Sunday afternoon the cats had reclaimed the best chair, Sir Charles had stolen the last biscuit, and Agatha Raisin had sworn off parish committees forever. Naturally, this meant she would attend the next one. What small domestic detail would you have noticed first? The tea stain, the folded paper wedge, or the missing corrected hymn-sheets? Thank you for listening to Cotswold Cozy Mysteries. I'm Clara Whitfield, and I hope you'll share your thoughts on this little Carsely scandal in the comments. And when the final verse is sung, Agatha Raisin learns that village respectability is sometimes only gossip with a better hat. Until our next village misadventure, keep your tea hot, your eyes open, and your hymn-sheets carefully checked.